Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Tonic Accord Podcast. I'm here with my buddy Drew, as always. I hope everyone's doing well. Thanks for tuning in. Today, I want to just get right after it and talk about the new impeachment information and things that are happening currently in Washington. Drew, how are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm trying to stay away from the coronavirus, and I'm just here on a Sunday.
Yeah, you were just telling me they reported a case in Orange County, huh?
Yeah, so we have 3 cases in the United States, and that's always fun. Obviously these are things that probably come and go, right? Just like swine flu, just like Ebola, but it's still kind of crazy to think about how like just one of these bad boys could be the super virus. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, I'm a hypochondriac already, and so I was reading up on it, and I'm like, I just don't want to know.
Yeah, stay away from Wuhan, China these days, I guess.
Yeah, I guess I'm gonna have to cancel my trip there. So.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
changes all my vacation plans.
Yeah, exactly right. But yeah, anyways, on to impeachment. Lots to talk about there. It's been pretty crazy. Of a week. But just according to the BBC, for anyone maybe who hasn't been following it as closely as we have, the proceedings. So the impeachment has now left the House and is now in the Senate. And this is where the actual trial begins. And so basically the proceedings began on Tuesday. And it was actually kind of interesting because Republican Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell proposed a tight 2-day limit for the opening arguments. But actually it's been extended now to 3 after large protests from Democrats. But they have still delayed a vote on whether to accept new witnesses or not, which is very controversial.
Right.
Adam Schiff is the head of the 7 impeachment managers. And he serves as the prosecutor, and he opened his oral arguments to a packed Senate on Wednesday, in which he said, in quotes, the president's actions were exactly what the founding fathers feared when they came up with impeachment, a remedy as powerful as the evil it was meant to combat, Mr. Schiff said. And so the president's defense team is focused on their accusations about the Bidens. Obviously, there's a lot of flaws in this attack, I would say. But this is where they are focusing, and they're responding to the impeachment manager's case. Republican senators and members of the defense team said on Thursday that the Democrats have invited them to talk about the Bidens, which I'm not sure how much I agree with that. But so far it seems, I'm curious to know your take, but so far it seems that the Democrats have a much more orchestrated case.
Yeah. Look, if you just look at the time taken, right? Schiff used all 3 days, whereas the defense used about 2 hours on Saturday. And so that alone, right? And that might be an interesting strategy, because I think the average American is not watching all 3 days of these opening statements, and so I think the defense going for just a quick 2 hours might help them with viewers in the news, but legally it doesn't look good. It looks like, if this was a real trial, it wouldn't look that good if your defense is way shorter than your prosecution's opening statement. But yeah, I am kind of concerned about this whole witness thing, because one argument is that we already heard from witnesses in the portion of the impeachment in the House, so why would we need to hear from them again in the Senate? But the counter argument to that is, we're talking about new witnesses, right? Because not everyone that you could consider to be important in this case was interviewed or put on the news in the House part. And we also have new information, right? Lev Parnas is giving out new information. We have not heard from John Bolton. So I think there is reason to suggest that we need to hear from more witnesses, but we'll see if that goes through. So you need 50. You just need a basic majority to get that agreed upon to get new witnesses, right? So some of the people in the middle, like Mitt Romney, are kind of on the fence. And so Romney recently, just today, said he's very likely to allow witnesses, but he won't speak on, he won't give a definitive answer till they reach that point. So we'll see. We'll see if there's going to be new witnesses. What do you think? Do you think there should be new witnesses like Bolton?
So yes and no. Kind of like you just provided us with the two counterpoints to why and why not. Um, I think, well, first off, holding the articles of impeachment over the holidays until January, I think actually worked out in favor for Democrats. I was questioning it at first, but it does seem that because Pelosi held these articles, it gave time for more witnesses or potential witnesses to come out, right? And now we've heard I always call him Michael Bolton. Then we've heard John Bolton say that he would be willing to testify. And yeah, like you said, you have Lev Parnas, who has come out and says that there was knowledge inside the Trump administration of this withholding of aid. Um, I, I think witnesses should be allowed, yes. But the only problem is that I think, especially the media and Adam Schiff have been kind of putting it on a pedestal that if Bolton and Parnas testify, or Mick Mulvaney, that they're going to have damning evidence against the president. And yes, maybe, we don't know. But also I'm worried that actually, I mean, John Bolton, Mick Mulvaney, they are Republican hacks, and they are on Trump's side. So I think people maybe don't understand that maybe they're not going to say anything that damning against the president. And so it could be opening up a Pandora's box, I guess, of information that maybe could hurt the Democrats or could help them. But it's a big gamble,
Yeah, it would be a gamble. It's not going to be like I think similar to other witnesses we've had in the past, right? Like a Michael Cohen, like it's not going to be this big smoking gun. It'll look bad for the president, but like I don't think much will change. I think you're right. But it's still worth, I guess, like having them, because they are important and key, right? John Bolton has been quoted saying he's been in the room with this discussion of what's going to happen. He says, I don't want to be a part of this drug deal. So I'd love to find out what made him think that was a drug deal, quote unquote. Obviously, it's a euphemism or a metaphor. But I'd love to find out why he thought that was kind of sketchy. So, I think there is justification for having new witnesses. If we want to look at like precedent, it looks like in the Bill Clinton Senate trial, there was they did some behind closed door depositions for some of the testimony. They took videotaped closed door depositions from Monica Lewinsky, Clinton's friend Vernon Jordan, and White House aide Sidney Blumenthal. But and the Senate agreed at that time that these videotapes would suffice as testimony, and so they did not call like live witnesses. So I wonder if that could be an alternative, right? Like, okay, maybe you skip the media circus a little bit at least, and you have John Bolton give a closed door deposition for everyone on the Senate. So there's kind of a little bit of precedent for kind of this issue, and maybe that could be an alternative.
I think that's a fair point. Actually, I didn't really think about that. It is true that but I actually think that as we've seen this week, though, it seems like there's more of a push to bring in witnesses. So, I mean, a positive out of that is there's, I think, 5 senators, Republican senators, that are up for election in autumn, and they're all in the hot seat. Like we have Susan Collins, Martha McSally of Arizona, Thom Tillis of North Carolina, Cory Gardner of Colorado, and Joni Ernst of Iowa. And it's interesting because all of these are in, obviously, Republican areas, but Trump's popularity is not extremely high, especially in Maine for Susan Collins. So I think she's kind of walking on eggshells here. It's like she's considered, in quotes, a moderate Republican. But I mean, she hasn't always been that moderate. But I honestly think that at least 3 of these senators will probably vote to allow witnesses. But it's interesting. Going back to what you said about the Clinton Clinton impeachment. Sorry, is that I think the one big difference though is that the case, there was already enough evidence of what happened. You know what I mean? Like the witness tampering, obstruction of justice, and obviously the sexual acts. Like I don't know if there was as much of a need for witnesses in that case
Right.
by the time it got to the Senate. While as in this one, there's still a lot of questions, and we're in such a divided, hyper-partisan news bubble that it's really hard to actually know what is true and what is not. I mean, if you watch Fox News, you think Hunter Biden is the devil, and he's, this is all centered around a corrupt Biden case. But if you watch on the left, it's that Trump is unfit to do this, and he's, obstructed justice and he's withheld aid unconstitutionally. And so it's hard. It's hard to see this. And I think that's why at the end of the day I would probably support Bolton testifying. But then that opens up the Pandora's box, and I think you would almost have to Hunter Biden testify just to appease and find a compromise.
I suppose. I don't. Again, I don't think, like, personally, I just don't think that, like, regardless of, like, the actions that the president has taken or has been accused of taking, in of their own are constitutional offenses. In of their own are impeachable offenses, regardless of the target, right? So, like,
Right.
yes, like, I agree that one, I'm not a fan of Biden, and two, it does look kind of sketch that Hunter Biden was just put on this board of this, Ukrainian energy thing. But that doesn't justify the president withholding military aid and going through back channels to get the Ukrainians to open up an investigation, right? So, like, whether or not Hunter is corrupt doesn't excuse the president's actions, because he didn't go through the proper channels, and it seems like he did it in a way to use political tokens like military aid for a personal gain. So while I understand that there's the argument, we need to hear from both sides, so let's hear Hunter Biden, that doesn't make sense in the context of this impeachment trial, because it would be like, I don't know, it'd be like stalking someone to find out if they're cheating on you. It's like, okay, if they're cheating on you, that sucks, but you still can't, like, stalk them and do illegal things, right? Like, you're still in the wrong with your own actions, regardless of what you thought you were trying to accomplish. Like, that, do you know what I mean? That's a kind of a bad example,
Yeah.
but you know what I mean? Like, so, I hear why people want to hear Joe Biden and Hunter Biden testify, but they're not the ones on trial. Frankly, if you want to go down that route, okay, if you want to hear Hunter Biden testify, let's hear Donald Trump testify. Of course he's not going to do that. Of course he's going to have his lawyers do it for him. But ideally, I mean, obviously you can plead the fifth, but in trials, right, you want to cross-examine the defendant as well. We're not going to get that. So the idea of, like when people complain that this isn't a fair trial because, Hunter Biden, where we need to hear from the Bidens, I don't buy that. And I don't think that's really supported by how trials work.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I mean, I think in a perfect world, it's true that Hunter. I mean, I think it's just two separate issues, like you've said. Is that, yeah? I mean, there can be a broad discussion about whether presidential and vice presidential children can get all this power, but it's nothing new. I mean, let's be honest. That's I mean, Ivanka Trump her brand has grown under Trump. I mean,
Jared Kushner included.
Jared Kushner, yeah. The Clintons. I mean, their daughter's done pretty well for herself. So yeah, it's nothing new. I do want to go back to talking about witnesses just for a second, because there was a really interesting Atlantic article I was reading earlier today, and it basically discusses how an impeachment trial without witnesses is unconstitutional. Which, I mean, I think that could be a little extreme, but they have an interesting point, as they say that McConnell has created the mistaken impression that the Constitution does not provide any guidances about impeachment. And the article highlights a 1993 Nixon versus the United States case. This was not Richard Nixon. This was a federal judge, Walter Nixon. And they found in this impeachment trial clause, in Article 1, Section 3 of the Constitution, a limitation on the method by which the Senate can conduct an impeachment proceeding. The Senate shall have the sole power to try all impeachments. Justice White interpreted the word try to mean that the impeachment proceeding must be in the nature of a judicial trial, and concluded that a procedure that could not be deemed by a trial by reasonable judges would be unconstitutional. And so he found support for this conclusion in Alexander Hamilton's arguments in the Federalist number 65, in which he says judicial character as a court for the trial of impeachments. And in Federalist number 66, he referred to the Senate as a court of impeachments. So basically, we need to realize that the Senate is supposed to do an actual trial, not this partisan thing that we think is okay, because I think people are kind of jaded to impeachment to say, oh, it's just a partisan battle. But basically, I think it's a point well taken, is that it's more than that. It should be conducted at similar means to an actual trial. And in an actual trial, you're supposed to allow witnesses. Sorry, That was a long way to say that. But
right. It's almost like yes, so like in the House, there was, interviews and and discussions, right? We heard from people that were kind of like witnesses, but we have to kind of view that as being administered as evidence into the Senate trial, right? Because we've been seeing, if you watch it on live, they'll reference stuff and they'll cut to a video from the House impeachment hearings. That's kind of like a minute, like allowing evidence. We still need to have witnesses themselves in this Senate trial, and then perhaps like expert witnesses, right? Legal scholars, to come in and, give their take. That would make it more of a trial. I also think that's a big part of a trial is having impartial jurors. And that is definitely not what we have. We definitely have, we've had people like Mitch McConnell just say outright at the beginning that I'm not going to be an impartial juror. I don't have any idea that I am. I'm going to be working with the White House every step of the way. So it does seem like this impeachment is not adhering to the the honesty and credibility that it needs to.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And that kind of sideways into the fact that Alan Dershowitz, one of Trump's counsel, he's arguing that impeachment requires an actual crime or criminal-like behavior. And it's very interesting because this argument has no point of historical reference, because Richard Nixon was nearly impeached for abuse of power, which is not a crime. And Andrew Johnson was impeached for, among other things, in quotes, declaring with a loud voice certain intemperate, inflammatory, and scandalous harangues. And I mean, those are not crimes, but it's something that results in needing to impeach the president. So I think this argument is weak, because history tells us that it doesn't need to be an actual crime, right?
Right.
So I don't know. It's interesting to see where they're going here. It's all procedural, their arguments, but the Democrats seem to have just more direct evidence. So I think that's problematic for the Trump team. I don't know. It's weird.
Yeah, and again, I think grander scale, right, is, again, if you haven't listened to this podcast before, if you have listened to this podcast before, you know what I'm going to say is they're not going to impeach the guy, right? The Senate's not going to do it. But I think that if you do have like Susan Collins and Mitt Romney allow for witnesses, it could just make this look a lot worse for the president and perhaps hurt his approval among moderates and people in the middle. I don't think his base is going to change at all. But yeah, I think the witness thing, having witnesses, is for the cameras, right? Now, it should be also, it is part of like having a fair trial. But I think that the Democrat strategy is, if we can get people on record saying these things, for the rest of history, and it could also damage Donald Trump's chances in the election, right? Having John Bolton say that I thought they were about to do something illegal or something of that sort. But in the end result is still going to be the same, witnesses or not, that, they're not going to get the 2/3 vote to remove him from office.
Right. And I think you're right. It is for the cameras, because the senators, I think, for the most part, have made up their mind. But the voters haven't. There's a lot of voters that haven't. So it could be, it could be a good attempt. But unfortunately, though, at the same time, Trump's approval rating is still at about 40%, and that's 90% of Republican voters. And this hasn't changed since before September, according to The Guardian. So,
right.
Even before this all started, his approval's the same. People hate him, people love him, and there's not much of a change there. So I'm just worried at the end of the day that, yes, there's going to be camera footage of bad things that Trump's done and senators arguing and complaining, but I think you're right. I don't see any big change here. So then it comes to the next question: is this all worth it? I'm curious to know what you think on it, because I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Again, the worth it thing, right? Like politically, it's hard to say. There was definitely like there's definitely a dip when it first came out about the Ukraine scandal. There's definitely a dip in his approval, but then it kind of teeters back to what we've seen for the last 4 years in total. It's kind of been hovering around that 40 to 43% approval rating. I think as far as like I also did notice that engagement is down. Like I saw an article. Let me see if I can actually find it. Here it is, from The Hill. Online engagement drops for Senate impeachment trial. So the amount of people that were clicking on links and commenting on articles, right, has gone down since the House section of the impeachment. So it seems like a lot of people, And I kind of feel this myself, are getting just kind of tired. Like, not that it's not important, but just like it's just so much. You know, you had 3 days of opening statements, and it's hard for people to follow that when they have things going on in their own lives, and especially since, you know, if you really understand what's going on, that you already know the result, right? It's almost like I'm on season 4 of Game of Thrones, but I've already seen season 8. You know, it's I don't have much motivation to watch, right? So it's just interesting that like the online engagement is down in this later part of the impeachment, which might be telling that people don't care as much. It's still in the millions, though, of course, right? It's 17.8 million interactions on the stories since last Tuesday, but that's compared to 32.5 million interactions in the first 3 days of the House impeachment hearings.
Jeez, yeah, that's quite significant. But I mean, I think you're right. People just have a little bit of impeachment fatigue, and
Yes.
like you said, it's like having already seen that finale of Game of Thrones, and then trying to watch the show. It's like it's going to change how you view it, And
Yes.
that's a good point, And I think the other implication of this impeachment could actually not be good for some of these senators running for president, because Iowa is currently is coming up, and if this doesn't get rushed up, they're going to spend less time on the campaign trail and more time in the Senate. You know what I mean? And so it doesn't benefit like Amy Klobuchar or, I mean, maybe even Elizabeth Warren to a certain extent,
Yeah, or Bernie Sanders.
It helps these, or Bernie. Yeah, exactly. So it's another thing is that Trump can still be out at his rallies and, gaining fire, I guess you could say. And these senators are stuck in this process. So I'm curious to see how that's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I imagine if you're trying to be on the campaign trail, that's already busy enough. Then you have to keep going back to D.C. for these long hearings. Yeah, I can imagine it gets it can put a wrench in your campaign plans. I think luckily these days is most of your media and advertising does that for you, right? Like because Bernie Sanders is still polling pretty well in Iowa, and he's been having to deal with this impeachment. But that's because our the way you do campaigns has changed. You don't have to be on a bus as much anymore if you just blast advertisings on the internet and TV. You still have to be on the bus. You still have to be on the bus at some point, right? You still have to meet with people and kiss babies and all that. But it's more possible to, I think, to go a week doing this stuff with the power of advertising today. But we'll see. It still could have an effect, and probably just physically, right, having to deal with all this stuff and be mentally there can just be fatiguing for sure.
Yeah, some of the reports coming in from these Senate trials, because you can't bring in your phone.
Oh my gosh.
And there's reports of Lindsey Graham sneaking out to the bathroom to use his phone. There's Rand Paul's drawing a beautiful picture of the Capitol, which I mean is kind of scary that none of these guys are taking it very seriously. But I mean, there's a lot of 70 and 80-year-olds, like 12-hour, 16-hour days. Oof.
Yeah,
like it takes a toll.
I'm sure some of these guys are falling asleep. I heard about the candy desk. You hear about the candy desk?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, how there's one senator. It's passed down from senator to senator. I forget who has it now, but I think it's some Republican guy from like New Mexico or something. But it's like a desk full of candy, and so everyone just keeps like snagging Reese's Pieces cups to stay awake. I thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah. So, but I mean, my big question is, I know Republicans really hope to get this wrapped up before the State of the Union, for obvious just image reasons. They don't want to have President Trump currently being impeached as he's speaking about the health of the nation, obviously. But I'm curious, do you think this will be quick?
I think so. I think so. I think it'll be quick, especially if you don't have witnesses. Of course, the Democrats will hoot and holler. But I think it'll be pretty quick. I hope it's quick. Just because not from any political strategy point, but just because I'm tired of it. Yeah, that's just a personal thing. But yeah, I mean, I do think that I don't know. I think Democrats will benefit from dragging it out Republicans will benefit from getting it over quick.
Yeah.
But it's tough to say. It's tough to say because if the Democrats drag it out too long, then they risk the idea of like, the fatigue hitting in from all sides.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. And I mean, you're right. I mean, at the State of the Union, if Trump's been acquitted, it looks great for him. And at the State of the Union, if he's surrounded by members of the House and Senate who are currently still impeaching him, it's not a good look. So I'm curious to see how that plays out. But I just think it's going to be fast, unless we get into this game of witnesses, though. Then it could get interesting. I don't know if it's going to get better, but yeah, I mean, it's almost time for the election, and I personally just want the voters to go out and say what they think. I do think it did not help Trump when he was in Davos, and he said that when he was talking about the impeachment, he said it wasn't going well because he had all the material and they don't have the material. I think it's been a little overblown. No, I mean, I think it's overblown. I think he just means that we have a better case and we are on top of it, which, I mean, that's very debatable. But I think everyone's jumping around saying, oh, he's made a confession that we're withholding evidence. I mean, maybe.
No, that's a stretch.
I think so. He's not really good at speaking politically like usual. So
yeah, or concisely. Yeah. Like it's very vague and like, wait, what did you mean by that? And I'm sure his lawyers are slapping their heads like, would you shut up? But it's not enough to be like, oh, he just admitted to a crime. Like that's not true.
No, I don't think so.
But I would, if I was his lawyer, I'd be like, hey, just don't talk about impeachment at all. I would just advise him to just shut up about impeachment completely. Like today, again, another thing that, can't quite be considered a crime, but is definitely like really, really sketchy is that he says today he tweeted that Adam Schiff has not paid the price for his impeachment nonsense. Or sorry, let me get the exact tweet. But basically, right? Yeah, basically, some people have taken this as like a threat. And it says Adam Schiff is a very sick man, is a corrupt politician, and probably a very sick man, and he has not paid the price for impeachment. Jesus. So it's like, again, it's like, dude, like, shut up. You're not helping your case, and and especially since. It's like he's supposed to be a unifying figure, right? He's in the office of the president. It's pretty unpresidential to say something like that, to like, you'll pay the price for impeachment. Even though it's vague, it's like, dude, that does sound kind of threatening to me. I don't know. It's just unfortunate that we're at this point.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the same thing with Yovanovitch, when he said, we need her out. We need to take her out.
Right.
It just has this kind of political mob boss kind of sound.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I guess he does define that in every way possible. I mean, we talked about political party machines a few weeks ago and their corruption, and I mean, he just reminds me of like a 1920s Chicago
mob boss.
Republican, completely. And he just needs to watch his words. But it doesn't sound good when, Adam Schiff needs to pay the price and Yovanovitch, we need to take her out. I mean, it's just sounds just corrupt and schemy. So I think it's pretty hypocritical to call out the Bidens for being corrupt when clearly there's some, a whole other discussion could be had about Trump's corruption. But unfortunately, none of it is really linked with the presidency, I don't think. But he's definitely a questionable man with some things that I don't think are good. But yeah.
No, definitely not.
So we'll see. No, but I just hope things don't get too ugly. I think we need to. I think the nation needs to become more together than what's happening now. Because that Atlantic article I was talking about, like in quotes, they just said at the end of the one about the unconstitutional impeachment without witnesses, it says an unconstitutional verdict of acquittal would present Americans with something far worse than a constitutional crisis. The nation will have blundered its way into creating an accidental autocracy governed by a president who, even if not reelected, would remain in office until January 20th, 2021. And so it's kind of just sending a message that, again, he's above the law, and that's a big answer that I don't have. And that would just be a whole new vague issue that the U.S. would be faced with is, I guess, if you can't impeach a president before he's reelected, then what's impeachment? And will someone worse be untouchable?
Yes,
it's a valid question.
It is a valid question, considering that there has never been an impeached president that's also been removed from office from the Senate. right? Nixon left on his own accord. Clinton survived the Senate trial. Trump most likely will survive the Senate trial. It's a good question of like, perhaps maybe we need to relook at what impeachment should mean, and perhaps we need to maybe, I don't know, like maybe make it easier to have something, maybe have impeachment have real weight, because we've impeached presidents and it hasn't led to much. The only one was Nixon, who left on his own accord. And that was his choice.
That was an exception.
Yes, that's an exception to the rule, because that was his choice. It wasn't the will of the people at that point, right? So yeah, it makes you wonder, like, what happens when we really get someone, even, I would consider like worse than Trump, or who every American would consider bad. Would impeachment be a way to get them out of office? Like, because so far it hasn't been. I don't know. It's an interesting thing. It's an interesting thing to think about the future of what impeachment means.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think you're right. And like Jay Sekulow and some of Trump's other legal counsel have argued that this impeachment isn't constitutional because you're trying to remove a duly elected president. But it's like,
that's the point of impeachment.
That's the point. Yeah, like, so if you can't remove a duly elected president from office, then there is no impeachment. It doesn't exist.
Like, right.
And so I don't know what precedent this is going to set, but I honestly just think in general with this entire presidency is that I think America's going to have some healing and some reflection to do, because a lot of our institutions are being shaken at their core right now. So I don't know. Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah.
Well, if any of you listening at home have any further thoughts on this impeachment, if you know how season 8 of Game of Thrones ends, feel free to comment below. Let us know. We always want to hear from you. It helps us with engagement and getting our show out there, and we do read everything that we see on the comments. So, as always, thank you for tuning in, and stay tuned for another episode later this week about social democracy and democratic socialism.